Welcome to In Touch, dedicated to real estate professionals worldwide. We're here to educate you, entertain you, and empower you in all facets of real estate. Are you ready for the latest news, trends, and market updates? Then it's time to get in touch. Welcome to the show. Today we have a special guest, and that is Jerre Walker, who comes with nearly 20 years of property management experience. You know, property management is one of those things in our industry that doesn't get enough attention. And I believe that one of the best ways to create residual and recurring income for professionals in the real estate industry is to take a good look at the property management services. Now, let's talk about that for a minute, because in sales, you typically go through the roller coaster of the sales cycle. But in property management, once you have put some doors under your belt and you have established a great clientele, you can count on that income month after month after month. Typically, investors will buy more and more property. Now, there is reasons, and from time to time, they do sell the property. And in that case, you can even earn a sales commission. So I love property management. I reflect back on my 25-year career and wonder why we didn't establish that property management division in our organization a lot sooner. But I am so pleased to be here with Jerre Walker this morning to discuss what it's like to be a full-time property manager. So Jerre, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, let's start off with giving the listeners some context. You have 20 years in the industry. Were you always doing property management, or did you start with sales? How did you come to that revelation that this was your niche and this is where you needed to be for the remainder of your career?
I pretty much started out in property management. I had an opportunity to join my brother, who was a broker at an office in Solana Beach, and he needed help. And so I just sort of jumped in with him, and we, built the business up to, I don't know, like we probably had 60 properties at one point. But so yeah, I just pretty much started, with the property management, and then, from there, earned the sales and, the buyers and that kind of business after that.
And if someone wants to get into property management, let's say they've been licensed, they know the mechanics, the basics of real estate, but they like to get started, where do they start with breaking into property management?
Well, I think probably the best way would be to partner up with a property manager that's already doing a good amount of business and that needs help, and they can, learn from that person, because there's really a lot that goes into it. And just to start on your own without any sort of a mentor or something like that would be pretty overwhelming. So I would say basically, find a property manager that needs help and, dive in with them.
Yeah, and I know, speaking from personal experience, when I was an agent in the field, I would get a lot of inquiry and interest from my clients to handle the property management or handle the leasing when they decided not to sell, or if a property wasn't selling. And I believe the temptation for many sales agents is to appease their client and want to stay in control and handle this element. But in reflection, I realized it really was a disservice to that client, because real estate sales professionals typically do not understand all the laws for tenants and the landlords and the rights, and especially in a state like California or New York or any of the coastal states that are very, very tenant friendly. Can you speak on that a little bit to encourage sales professionals to go ahead and refer that business out and not try to do it themselves?
Yeah. A lot of agencies don't even allow agents to do property management. So in that case, they pretty much have to, refer it to some other agency that does work in the property management arena. But I would say that unless you are, pretty much devoted to doing property management, and you're willing to learn all the laws and, follow all the processes that you need to follow, then, I mean, you really need to do that if you want to be a property manager. Otherwise, you're putting yourself in jeopardy, as an agent, and also putting your property owner in jeopardy, for different claims, discrimination or, that kind of thing, when you don't really have all the knowledge that you need to have. And I've run into that quite a bit where, I take over properties that have been managed either by the owner or by agents that don't specialize in property management, and then they've gotten themselves into some kind of a situation. And so it is really important, I believe, to have someone that is, um, well versed in everything about property management.
And I'm glad you brought up the situation about brokerages not allowing property management, because for a long time, our brokerage early on did not allow property management for liability purpose. We didn't have great property managers that we could depend on. We didn't have any property managers. Therefore, it didn't make sense to offer the service. Now, today we do. We have a flourishing division. It makes a lot of sense, but it really is its own segment of the industry. And I have seen situations where the brokerage does not allow property management. And the workaround for some sales professionals is they'll say, well, I'm just going to lease it. I'm not going to manage it, which I think is a huge mistake. And I know this from personal experience from time to time. Me and my family have gone out there and leased properties, whether short term or mid-term, long term. And there's a definitive difference when you run into a property manager or a listing that is hosted by a property management company versus a listing that a sales professional is just trying to lease out for their client, and they're not going to be managing. And I'll give you a real world example. I was in a property recently that had been on the market. This is for lease for 3 or 4 months. They had started the price at $14,000 a month, and they were all the way down to $9,000 a month. And when we entered the property, we were clearly told that the owner really didn't want to have to do anything once we moved in. And essentially that, it's as is, and, hope it works out. And I thought, okay, no one in their right mind is going to lease this property at this price. That's why it's been sitting here for 3 or 4 months, given those variables. Versus I walked into another property that was perfectly cleaned out, perfectly prepared, priced right, and there was an application later that day and it was gone off the market within 48 hours. And that's where that specialty comes in. And again, referencing back to the previous listing I described, 4 months of market time where that owner is essentially losing that rent. That's opportunity cost. And let's say the right price is $9,000. Well, after 4 months, that was $36,000 that could have come to that owner. But because of the list price or just, no interest in management and service and taking care of the tenant, it just sat there. So word to the wise for those who have been doing some leasing, they're not property managers. My encouragement to you would be to find a great property manager like Jerre Walker, other local property managers. And I think the concern for sales professionals is that they're going to lose control or potentially lose the client and lose a listing sometime in the future if another professional enters the equation. So, Jerre, can you speak to that? Do you work with professionals, sales professionals that come to you and say, here's my client, but I want to make sure that, I'm going to be involved if there is a sale in the future?
Yes, I do. And I can't say that I've had a lot of that type of experience happen to me over the 20 years. I can't think of a situation where, a tenant moved in and, then at the end of their tenancy, they went back to their agent and purchased a home, or a, a property owner that leased out their property with me and I managed it. And then it went back to the original referral agent for sale. I just can't think of anything like that. But I mean, I would be happy, to cooperate with, other agents in that respect.
That's excellent. And Gary Giffen is here in the studio as well. Gary, I did want to invite you into the conversation as a sales agent who does not do property management. What's your personal policy and what do you do with your clients when they need those leasing or management services?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. And I know there's a lot of real estate agents that like to manage properties, but I think that's that's crazy. You can't do both. You certainly can try, but you're not going to be able to give the client the service that they need. And certainly, I don't want to, wake up in the morning and find out that, somebody's toilet's clogged and I didn't get back to him in time. So I know Jerry has been doing this for years. There's no sense a real estate agent trying to do both. So I always tell my clients that are investors that don't want to deal with that. The amount of money that you're paying a property manager is nothing. Plus, it's a write-off. So you do want to find somebody that's really good, like Jerry, that has been doing it for years, has the systems down, and you just, buy the property, turn it over to a great property management company. And Andrew's picked out the best that we can possibly find for AARE, and so there's no reason to take on that extra stress. Let's turn it over to the professionals.
No, it's great advice. And we're going to dive into the fees. We are going to have a second episode on this topic. And in episode 2, we will dive in deeply to if you want to become a property manager and partner up with somebody like Jerry suggested, and ultimately one day be your own property management, then what does that look like? What can you earn? What's the capacity? What's the max amount of units a single property manager can take on? We'll dive deeper into that. But just for context, Jerry, why don't you give us some numbers based in just in residential? I know that's what you specialize in. Typically, the fees from what I've seen are around 6 to 8% per month. And then there's a leasing fee when the property goes vacant. And there's traditionally some administrative fees for a few things that you do throughout the year. Can you walk us through what those fees look like?
So typically we charge 8% per month on rent collected. So, and that depends on, the rental rate also. The lower rental rates, you would definitely want to charge the 8%, anything around under 2,500 or so. And then once you get up to, if you have a rental that's, 6,000 a month or something like that, you can sort of adjust, to make it fair for the owner. And then the lease fee, typically what I do is to find a tenant, to screen them, to do the lease, to, basically get them into the property, move in and all that. It's a fee equal to a half of 1 month's rent. So, for example, if the rent is $5,000 a month, the leasing fee would be $2,500 upon, securing the tenant and getting them moved in. And then the other fees, they're pretty minimal. There's like a $50 fee for 1099 preparation and year-end statement preparation. I think there's a $250 onboarding fee just to get, like a new owner put into the system and the property put in and everything. And then there is a possibility of some other fees if you have like a large project and the owner wants you to sort of be like the project manager. I've had a few where, like the owner wanted to do exterior painting and termite work. And, it was quite a big job to manage. So, we typically charge like 10% of the total of the work that's being done as a fee to the owner. And that's all, negotiable with the owner. But that's something that's kind of important because you can kind of get yourself into a situation where you're doing a lot of project management with no extra compensation. And it happens often when you have like a flood or a water leak, a pipe leak, or something that causes water damage, and you have mold remediation, and you have the restoration, and you have tenants that need to be put up in different housing, and it just gets like to be a really complicated situation with not much compensation. So but those are basically the fees that we charge.
No, it's a great overview. And then I'll comment just on the vacation rental market because there's property management that's involved there and the commercial market. And certainly with multifamily, retail, office, industrial, that's a whole nother can of worms, but it is its own piece of this niche in the industry. And so for vacation rentals, typically it's going to be 20 to 30% of whatever that rental income is. Certainly with the turnover in vacation rentals, that's much more frequent than long-term rentals, especially if you're doing, minimum 3-night stay or 7-night stay. And those fees can really add up, but you are typically running a hotel at the end of the day if you're going to be in the vacation rental space, and it is its own niche. In commercial, those fees really come down because of the size of the assets and the gross income that's flowing through on a monthly basis. For example, for a multifamily apartment building that might be 25 or 50 units, you typically are not going to pay more than 4 or 5% on the management fee. And as you get larger and larger and larger in those apartment complexes, those fees do diminish. Sometimes they go under 3%. And in the really, really large complexes, you can even see them lower than that. So it really comes down to what is that dollar amount on a monthly basis for that asset that's going to motivate a manager to take care of it. And in our next episode, we are going to dive deep on what it's like to be a property manager income-wise. What does this mean with 10 units, 20 units, 30 units, or above in the residential space? And I'll speak to the commercial space. Just with a handful of assets, you can develop a great, steady stream of income and get off that sales roller coaster that we all find ourselves on in the brokerage business. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. Catch us on the next episode. We're going to continue the conversation with Jerre Walker. Have a blessed day.